The wind on that first day was a playful adversary, a brisk February gust that tugged at the hoods of their jackets and whipped the fresh, dry snow into swirling devils around their skis. For the 9 hikers from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, this was the pinnacle of their training. A Category 3 expedition through the northern Urals, a journey meant to test their mettle against the elements and cement their status as master sportsmen. Led by the experienced and determined Igor Dyatlov, the group was a mix of seasoned veterans and enthusiastic newcomers, bound by a shared love for the austere beauty of the winter wilderness. There was Yuri Doroshenko, whose booming laughter often cut through the silence of the taiga, Georgy Krivonischenko, bright-eyed and tirelessly cheerful, the quiet, thoughtful Zenaida Kolmogorova, the sturdy and reliable Rustem Slobodin, the artistic and observant Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, the pragmatic and capable Ludmila Dubanina, and the inseparable pair Alexander Kolovatov and Yuri Yudin. Yudin, plagued by a persistent and worsening sciatica, would become the singular, fateful exception, turning back just days before the end, a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life, the sole survivor of a group of 10. They were young, strong, and imbued with the unshakable confidence of Soviet youth in 1959, a belief in progress, in science, in the ultimate triumph of human will over nature. Their diaries, recovered later, spoke of trivialities: the quality of the snow, the weight of their packs, a missed turn, a shared joke, the simple, unremarkable chronicles of a challenging trek. They made good time, pushing through the dense, snow-laden forests of the Mansi National District, their progress marked on a map that was slowly becoming a relic of a simpler, more comprehensible world. On January 31st, they began their ascent of the eastern slope of Kalatsyakal, a name they wouldn't have known from their mops, a Mansi phrase that would later echo with dreadful irony, the mountain of the dead. The weather began to turn, the playful gusts hardening into a persistent, driving wind that scoured the treeless slope. They fought their way upwards, the deep snow pulling at their skis, the visibility dropping as the sky and the land emerged into a uniform, blinding white. It was here, on that exposed mountainside, that they made their camp. This decision, more than any other, would become the central, perplexing question mark of the entire tragedy. Why not retreat a few hundred meters back into the shelter of the tree line? It was a deviation from all established mountaineering logic, a risk taken by experienced hikers who should have known better. The most plausible explanation is that they were simply behind schedule, exhausted from the arduous climb, and Dyatlov, judging the slope to be manageable, decided to press on and make camp where they were, perhaps believing they could tough out a single night on the open mountain. They pitched their large communal tent with practiced efficiency, digging it trenched into the deep snow to create a level platform, anchoring it securely against the growing fury of the wind. Inside, they created a small island of warmth and camaraderie, their breath pluming in the frigid air, the hiss of their Primus stove a comforting sound against the moaning of the gale outside. They ate, they talked, they wrote in their diaries. The last photograph, developed from a roll of film found in the tent, shows Krivonischenko and Doroshenko cheerfully melting snow for water, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of a lantern. There was no hint of panic, no foreshadowing of the cataclysm about to befall them. They were, in that final captured moment, simply 9 friends on an adventure. Then something happened, something so profoundly terrifying, so immediately and universally threatening that it overrode every instinct for survival, every scrap of hard-won mountaineering knowledge. Sometime in the deep, frozen heart of that night, between February 1st and 2nd, all 9 occupants of the tent were driven from its relative safety in a state of absolute, desperate flight. They did not simply get up and leave, they escaped. The scene discovered weeks later by the search party was one of surreal and chilling violation. The tent was still standing, but it had been slashed open from the inside. The cuts were clean, deliberate, made with sharp knives, creating multiple exits. The hikers were gone, vanished into the blizzard-racked darkness, but they had left in such a frantic hurry that their belongings remained behind. A museum of interrupted lives, warm outer clothing, boots, fur coats, personal diaries, their passports, and, most tellingly, almost all of their provisions. It was as if a fire alarm had been pulled in the dead of winter, and they had fled in their underwear, believing the immediate, unseen danger outside to be a greater threat than the certain, slow death by hypothermia that awaited them in the minus 30 degrees Celsius temperatures. The trail of footprints leading away from the tent told a story of controlled initial panic. The searchers, led by experienced mountaineers, found a set of 8 or 9 distinct tracks, some in socks, some in a single boot, some barefoot, all pressed deeply into the snow, heading down the slope towards the tree line a mile away. The tracks indicated they were moving together, not running blindly, but walking with purpose, as if fleeing from a specific, known threat. The first 2 bodies were found at the edge of the forest, under a great Siberian cedar. Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonischenko were dressed only in their underwear. They had managed to light a small fire here, evidence of a last futile attempt to survive. The bark of the cedar tree was scarred and broken, up to a height of 5 meters, as if one or both of them had repeatedly climbed it, perhaps to try and see the tent, to spot the source of their terror or to signal for help. They died here, their bodies frozen solid, the fire at their feet long since extinguished by wind and snow. The next 3 bodies were found in a line between the cedar tree and the tent, as if they had succumbed while trying to return to the relative safety of their shelter. Rustem Slobodin, Zinaida Komogorova, and Igor Dyatlov himself were discovered in various states of undress, their bodies contorted by the cold, their skin marbled with frost. Slobodin had a minor skull fracture, but not one considered fatal. These 5, the searchers initially thought, had simply fallen victim to hypothermia in a classic, if bizarre, chain of events. They had panicked, fled, and one by one, the cold had claimed them. It was a tragedy, but a conceivable one. The mystery, however, was only just beginning to unfurl its dark wings. It took another 2 months of grueling search efforts, as the spring thaw began to loosen winter's grip on the mountain, for the final 4 bodies to be discovered. They were found in a ravine, buried under 12 feet of snow, a location far removed from the others, suggesting they had sought shelter there after the initial flight. And it was here that the mystery transformed from a tragic accident into something altogether more sinister and inexplicable. These 4, Alexander Kolovatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Semyon Zolotarov, these last 2, the last to be found, they were dressed. In fact, they were bizarrely, macabrely dressed in clothing that did not belong to them. They wore a haphazard assortment of garments, items taken from the bodies of their fallen comrades. But it was their injuries that defied all rational explanation. Thibault-Brignol had a catastrophic skull fracture, described by the medical examiner as being caused by a blow of tremendous force, akin to a car crash victim. Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotarov had sustained massive, crushing injuries to their chests, their rib cages shattered inward, driven into their hearts and lungs with the force of a professional boxer's punch, or, as one investigator grimly noted, the impact of a steering wheel in a high-speed collision. Most horrifyingly, Lyudmila was missing her tongue, her lips, and part of her eyelids, injuries the autopsy determined had occurred ante-mortem, while her heart was still beating. There was not a single external wound on any of them. No bruises, no lacerations, no signs of a struggle. It was as if an invisible, crushing force had been applied to their bodies, leaving their skin unbroken while pulverizing the bones and organs beneath. The official investigation, hampered by the era's secrecy and a clear directive to close the case, floundered. The cause of death was listed as a compelling natural force. A phrase so deliberately vague, it only served to fuel speculation for decades to come. Theories, of course, proliferated like fungi in the dark soil of the unknown. The indigenous Mansi people were suspected, but there was no evidence of a confrontation, no tracks other than those of the hikers, and the Mansi had a long history of peaceful coexistence with travelers. A military test of a secret weapon was proposed, perhaps a radiological or sonic device, but no radiation was found on the clothing beyond trace amounts from their lanterns. The hikers were not spies. They were students on a hiking trip. Avalanche was a popular logical theory, but the slope was too gentle for a major slide, the tent was still standing upright, and the pattern of injuries bore no resemblance to avalanche trauma.